Growing up in Sweden, I was fascinated by our folklore, especially the ancient tradition of Arsgang, or otherwise known as the Year Walk. As a child, I'd listen wide-eyed to tales of these solitary nocturnal quests to see into the future, but I never imagined I would experience it myself, and certainly not in the way I did. That year, my curiosity got the better of me. I was 25, at a crossroads in life, eager to know what the future held. So I decided to undertake the Arsgang on New Year's Eve. According to tradition, I had to isolate myself, speak to no one, and fast on the day of the walk. As night fell, I set out, leaving my family's cozy New Year's celebration behind. The air was bitterly cold as I walked into the dense forest behind our house. The moon was a thin crescent, barely lighting the snow-covered path. The woods were eerily silent, the usual sounds of nightlife seemingly muted. As I walked, I remembered the old warnings. The Year Walk wasn't just about seeing the future. It was also a journey through a supernatural world, a test of one's courage against spirits and creatures of folklore. I chuckled to myself, dismissing these as mere tales to scare children. But as I ventured deeper, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder, and an inexplicable sense of dread began to envelop me. I heard a distant sound, like soft whispers carried by the wind. I stopped straining to listen, but the sound faded as quickly as it came. Shrugging off the unease, I continued my walk. That's when I first saw it, a figure in the distance, standing still among the trees. It was too far to discern any features, but its presence was unsettling. I quickened my pace, telling myself it was just a trick of the shadows. Then came the second encounter. I reached a clearing where the moonlight fell unobstructed, and there I saw them, ethereal figures dancing in a silent, ghostly waltz. They paid me no heed, lost in their eternal dance. My heart raced, my rational mind struggling to comprehend the sight. I should have turned back, but something compelled me to press on, deeper into the forest, deeper into the unknown. The path led me to a frozen lake, its surface a mirror to the starlit sky. That's where I saw her, the Huldra, a seductive forest spirit known to lure men to their doom. She was as beautiful as the legends described, her voice a melody that beckoned me closer. I stood at the edge of the lake, entranced, as she spoke in a voice that promised answers to my deepest questions. But as I stepped forward ready to succumb to her allure, I remembered the warnings about her deceitful nature. With every ounce of willpower, I tore myself away, her anguished scream echoing behind me as I fled. I wandered aimlessly after that, the forest seemingly closing in around me. Time lost meaning, the line between reality and the other world blurring. I stumbled upon a grotesque scene, a procession of spectral beings, their faces twisted in agony, reliving their moment of death over and over. I watched, horrified, unable to look away until they vanished into the mist. I realized then that the Arsgang was more than a ritual. It was a journey through the darkest corners of the soul. I had sought the future but found myself facing the unseen, the unspoken fears that lay buried in my heart. As dawn approached, the forest began to transform back to its mundane form. The creatures and spirits faded away, leaving me alone with the first light of the new year. Exhausted physically and emotionally, I made my way back home. My family was surprised to see me, having no idea of the ordeal I had been through. I couldn't bring myself to tell them, the words stuck in my throat. The Year Walk had changed me. It had shown me more than I was prepared to see, a glimpse into a world that defied understanding. I'd gone looking for my future, but had instead peered into the abyss, into the mysteries that lay beyond the veil of our reality. New Year's Eve always held a special place in my heart. It was a time to reflect, to celebrate, and to welcome the promise of a new beginning. That year, my partner, Sam, and I decided to host a small gathering at our house. Just a few close friends, some good food, and a toast at midnight. Simple, yet intimate. As the evening unfolded, laughter and music filled our home. We played games, reminisced about the past year, and shared our hopes for the next. It was shaping up to be a perfect night, right up until there was a knock at the door. I remember looking at the clock. It was close to midnight. Who could that be? Sam wondered aloud as I made my way to the door. Expecting maybe a late friend or a neighbor, I opened it with a smile. But it wasn't someone I recognized. Standing on our doorstep was a man, probably in his 60s, dressed in a worn-out coat, a hat pulled low over his eyes. "Happy New Year?" he exclaimed with an unsettling enthusiasm. I heard the laughter and couldn't resist. Mind if I join in? His sudden appearance was jarring, and a part of me wanted to close the door. But the New Year spirit, coupled with a reluctance to be rude, nudged me to let him in. Sure, I said hesitantly. Come on in. Sam raised an eyebrow when I introduced the man as a neighbor. Something in his demeanor seemed off, but we were caught up in the festivities, and our unexpected guest soon blended into the background. As the night progressed, however, his presence became increasingly disconcerting. He didn't mingle much, but watched us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to be studying us, memorizing our faces, our mannerisms. Unease settled over me, a growing sense that we had made a mistake by letting this stranger into our home. I tried to brush off the feeling, attributing it to the alcohol and the late hour. Then, as we gathered around to count down to midnight, things took a turn for the worse. Our guest, who'd been quiet for most of the evening, suddenly raised his glass for a toast. To new beginnings, he began, his voice steady and clear, and to secrets revealed. His words sent a chill down my spine. There was something ominous in his tone, a hidden meaning that I couldn't grasp. Our friends looked at each other, confused and uneasy. The man continued, his gaze sweeping over us. This year will bring change for all of you. Some will find love, others will lose it. Some will come into fortune, and others will meet misfortune. The room fell silent, the festive atmosphere replaced by a sense of foreboding. His predictions were oddly specific, as if he knew something about each of us that we didn't. As the final seconds to midnight ticked away, I felt a growing sense of dread. This was no ordinary New Year's toast. It felt more like a prophecy, a warning of things to come. The clock struck 12, and we all mechanically cheered and hugged, but the joy of the moment was lost. Our guest simply stood there, a knowing smile on his lips, as if he had just set in motion events beyond our control. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Our friends left shortly after midnight, their departures hastened by the stranger's unsettling toast. Sam and I were left alone with him, the silence in the house deafening. Finally gathering my courage, I asked him to leave. I think it's time for you to go, I said, my voice firm. He looked at me, his smile fading. Without a word, he got up, put on his hat, and walked to the door. Before stepping out, he turned to us. Remember my words, he said, and then he was gone, disappearing into the cold New Year's night. Sam and I locked the door behind him, a mix of relief and confusion washing over us. We talked about him for hours, trying to make sense of his presence, his toast, his knowing gaze. The days that followed were uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger's words were more than just a toast. They hung over us like a dark cloud, a premonition of something yet to come. As the year unfolded, strange coincidences began to happen. One of our friends did find love in an unexpected place, while another went through a painful breakup. A third friend came into a sudden inheritance, while yet another suffered a string of bad luck. With each event, the memory of the stranger's toast returned, a haunting reminder of that New Year's Eve. I couldn't help but wonder who he was, how he knew so much about us, and what his true intentions had been. I've always been a bit of a romantic, and like many, I turned to dating apps to find that special connection. When I matched with Ethan on Tinder, he seemed like a great guy, charming, witty, and attractive. We hit it off instantly, and after a week of chatting, he invited me to a New Year's Eve party. I was hesitant at first. Meeting a guy for the first time at a party didn't seem like the ideal first date, but Ethan assured me it would be a big event with lots of people. Plus, I'd be driving myself there, so I felt in control of the situation. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I spent hours getting ready, wanting to make a good impression. My excitement was tinged with nerves, but I chalked it up to first date jitters. The party was at a house in a nice part of town. As I pulled up, I was impressed. The place was decked out in lights, and I could hear music and laughter from inside. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to the door. Ethan was waiting for me, and he was even more handsome in person. He greeted me with a warm smile and led me inside. The house was packed, and the atmosphere was electric. For the first hour, everything seemed perfect. Ethan introduced me to his friends, we danced, and he never left my side. But as the night wore on, I started to feel uncomfortable. Ethan's demeanor changed. He became possessive, his arm around my waist a little too tight. his laughter a little too loud. He insisted on getting me drinks, and I noticed he was watching me intently as I drank them. Red flags started to go up in my mind. I decided to take a break and excuse myself to the restroom. When I returned, Ethan was waiting outside the door. His behavior was starting to scare me. I needed space, so I suggested we get some air outside. As we stood in the backyard, Ethan's behavior escalated. He tried to kiss me, and when I pulled away, he got angry. "Come on, I know you want this," he said, his voice laced with irritation. I felt panic rising. This was not the charming guy I had chatted with online. This was someone else, someone aggressive and frightening. I told him I wasn't feeling well and needed to leave. He grabbed my arm, his grip painful. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed. Adrenaline kicked in. I yanked my arm free and ran back into the house. I needed to get out, but he was right behind me, weaving through the crowd, calling my name. I pushed through the partygoers, my heart pounding. I had to find my keys, get to my car, and get away from this nightmare. As I reached the front door, Ethan caught up to me. He grabbed my arm again, pulling me towards him. But this time, a couple of partygoers intervened, asking if everything was okay. Seizing the opportunity, I pulled away and bolted outside. I could hear Ethan behind me, but I didn't look back. I found my car, jumped in, and locked the doors just as he reached it. He pounded on the window, yelling for me to open up, but I started the engine and drove off, leaving him standing in the street. The drive home was a blur. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to process what had happened. The charming guy from Tinder was a monster, and I had narrowly escaped a potentially dangerous situation. I got home safely and immediately blocked Ethan on all platforms. The next day I reported him on the app. My New Year's Eve had turned into a horror story, a chilling reminder of the dangers of online dating. New Year's Eve has always been my favorite holiday, a time to celebrate the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. So when my parents offered their cabin in the woods for a party, I jumped at the chance. Nestled away from the city's chaos, it seemed like the perfect spot to ring in the new year with my friends. I arrived at the cabin a day early to set everything up. As I pulled up, something felt off. The place looked unkempt, which was unlike my parents. There was trash scattered around the porch, and the door was slightly ajar. A shiver ran down my spine, but I brushed it off as forgetfulness on my parents' part. Inside, things seemed out of place. A few picture frames were askew, and some furniture appeared to have been moved. It was unsettling, but I reasoned it could have been a result of some animal finding its way in. I spent the day cleaning and setting up, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. By evening, everything was ready, and I was looking forward to my friends arriving the next day. New Year's Eve came, and the party started off great. We had music, drinks, and laughter filled the cabin. But as the night wore on, the strange occurrences I'd brushed off earlier started to make sense in a terrifying way. We heard it first around 10 p.m., a faint thumping sound coming from above. We all went silent, listening. It was rhythmic like footsteps, but too heavy for any animal. Unease settled over the group, and jokes about a ghost in the attic started to circulate. Trying to lighten the mood, I laughed it off. Maybe it's just the cabin settling, I suggested. But the sound continued, inconsistent, unnerving. It was nearing midnight when we finally decided to investigate. A mix of fear and alcohol-fueled courage led us to the attic door. I volunteered to go up first, the weight of my decision heavy in my gut. The attic was dark and dusty, the air stale. I fumbled for a light switch, my heart pounding. When the light flickered on, the sight before me made my blood run cold. There, in the far corner of the attic, was a man. He was disheveled, with wild eyes and a tattered coat. He looked just as surprised to see us as we were to see him. My friends gasped and someone screamed. The man stood up quickly, panic in his movements. "I didn't mean any harm," he stammered. "I just needed somewhere to stay." I was frozen, the realization hitting me like a wave. This man had been living in the attic, watching us, moving things around. The misplaced furniture, the door ajar, it all made sense now. We backed away slowly, making our way to the stairs. The man didn't follow. He just stood there, watching us with a mix of fear and desperation. Once downstairs, we locked the attic door and called the police. The wait for them to arrive was agonizing, every creak of the cabin setting us on edge. When the police finally came, they found the man still in the attic. He was homeless, they explained, probably looking for shelter in the cold winter months. They took him away, assuring us he was more scared than dangerous. But the damage was done. The party ended abruptly. the festive atmosphere replaced by a sense of violation. My friends left and I was alone in the cabin, the events of the night replaying in my mind. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound was a reminder of the stranger who'd been living just above us, an unwanted guest at our New Year's celebration.